This video is about the payment surplus constraint. We'll go through a few concepts and then perform a practical demonstration of the constraint in action. We start with the payment. In the ideal world, this entire payment is allocated to the invoice or invoices that it was meant to pay. The first non-ideality is that sometimes payers, such as motor vehicle insurers, will send a payment larger in amount than what was invoiced. The amount that's allocatable is allocated and the rest is not allocated. Not allocated is an inconvenient state for any payment amount to stay in. We have to get it out of this state. In many cases, it's marked as deferred. That is, deferred revenue. The concept here is that it will eventually be allocated to an invoice at some point. For example, in locations that sell programs of care, a patient will make a payment for the whole program, and as invoices are generated over time to receive payment amount allocations, the amount deferred is sequentially reduced. Once in a while, some subamount of a payment is refunded, or the entire amount is refunded, and of course any refunded amounts cannot be allocated. Okay, so it's off to Coligo to see how the payment surplus constraint works. We're logged into Coligo and in location Cassini, our training facility. The policy constraint is a setting in my location constraints. Let's take a look at that. There are two fields that govern the behavior of the payment surplus constraint. The first is the payment surplus constraint field, which determines whether the constraint is turned on or not. And the second is the YMD payment surplus constraint. When set to Y for yes, the payment surplus constraint is on, and when it's on, no payments can be created for any patient in the location if any payment on or after the date indicated in the second field, YMD payment surplus constraint field, for any patient bears any unallocated amounts. So the constraint looks at any payments that are posted on or after this date, YMD payment surplus constraint, and looks to see if there's any unallocated amounts. And if there are, then you cannot create any payments for any other patient in the clinic. The constraint ignores allocated amounts, since that's one of the goals of creating payments. It ignores NSF payments. It ignores deferred amounts, because we know that deferred amounts will eventually be allocated. It ignores refunded amounts, because they can never be allocated. And finally, it ignores all payments before the date indicated in the YMD payment surplus constraint field. So in this case, in Cassini, we have YMD payment surplus constraint value of 1969, December 31st. We're going to leave things as they are, and let's see what it looks like when we try to create a payment for a patient, Paige Davis. When we go to her account, under the payments heading, we see that there are payments not allocated. And the first of the patients that has a payment not allocated is indicated here. It's blue, so let's click it and will be forwarded to the patient's summary. In the payment section of the patient's summary, we can see the total of unallocated amounts in the totals row. So in this case, let's move the unallocated amounts over to refunded. So we've entered a new refunded amount into the payment, update the payment, and we can see that the unallocated payments total has changed, and the next patient with an unallocated payment is highlighted. We look at the total here for this patient and see that it is now 0 for unallocated payments. Let's go to the next patient. The total for unallocated payments here is shown in this total as well, so we'll open up that payment. This time let's set a deferred amount equal to the payment amount, update the payment. Number of unallocated payments has changed again. the total unallocated payment is 0. You notice the name didn't change. That's because there are two versions of this patient, and both versions had unallocated amounts. We'll set this one straight by looking at the unallocated amounts, opening up the payment. This time let's do a combination of refunded amount and amount deferred. Update the payment. I think from the exercise so far you get the idea that you have to go through every account that has an unallocated amount on it and somehow either eliminate the amount that has to be allocated or actually allocate the payment. Eventually in this exercise you would get to the point where you had no more unallocated payments. So let's say that we managed to get there in Cassini, and we'll take a look at Paige Davis's account. We're looking for a way to create a payment, and we now have one. Unallocated payments equals 0. We click the Create button to bring up the Payment Creation tool. There it is. Create a payment for $60 with $60 deferred, and there's the payment. And at this point, because the $60 was deferred, we can still create another payment. Let's perform the same exercise with this one, just for clarity's sake. We'll open up the payment, set the deferred amount to 0, update the payment, and we can see that we have an unallocated amount, so everything is behaving consistently. So that's the payment surplus constraint. On a day-to-day basis, your accounting will stay quite tidy, as it forces you to make sure that payments are either allocated or accounted in some way for the amount that is not allocated. One note of caution, Coligo is a multi-user system. Even in the same clinic, you may have more than one person in the location that has the responsibility of creating, deleting, altering payments, what have you. There will be times when you do not recall ever having created a payment and yet find yourself trying to create one and unable to do so because there is now an unallocated amount on a patient's file. This is likely because someone is in the midst of creating and allocating a payment as part of their work, and they're doing it as you're trying to create one, and they're not done their allocation yet. So communication is key. Make sure your team at your location has a way of handling such situations. Otherwise, thanks for watching.